So a bit of an ambitious agenda, but my focus will be on meaningful use stage 1 because that's where we are today. I will touch base on stage 2 because there's a good amount of new information that was released recently. And also in that package of information, there are modifications to stage 1. It's not only about stage 2. So the focus on stage 1 is a repeat slide from Keith, but it shows that everybody starts at stage 1, stay 2 years at each stage, and then graduates to the next one. And for those like our group, we are located in Central Jersey. We have 8 hospitals. We have 12 imaging centers. We do about 1 million procedures a year. We started in 2011, so we get an extra year of stage 1, which is good for us, I believe. So just touching base on this issue of eligibility, and there's 2 main criteria. The first one was talked about, this is about outpatient incentives. So 10% of your work or more has to be an outpatient setting. The other criteria is that you have to do 50% of your work if you work in multiple locations, as is in the case of my group. We have hospitals, we have private offices. Then 50% of your aggregate work has to be done in places with certified technology. And that actually has not changed for stage 2. I inserted, if you are less than 10% of outpatient, then you're a hospital-based physician. In my group, we have in excess of 100 radiologists. We attested 82, and the reason is that some of them were considered hospital-based. So they are outside of the incentive program. However, on the new language, you can apply to be excluded from a hospital-based designation if you are willing to fund the acquisition and insert that in the outpatient department of the hospital. I don't think that's going to happen, but in any case, it's an option. Let me talk about, this is the question that I always get at the end, so I inserted it right at the beginning, is about physicians practicing in private offices and in hospitals. So what happens to those? As in our case, about 350,000 procedures is done in the private offices, but about 650 to 700,000 is done at the hospitals, some of that done in an outpatient facility within the hospital. So if you only have an imaging center, your attestation is going to be the patients that come into your office, that's the denominator, and those that you are tracking, that will be the numerator. And if you are tracking every patient that comes in, that ratio is 100%, and that's the goal. Of course, the threshold changes for different measures. There are 25 measures, some are 80%, some are 50%, but that's essentially the equation. If you insert a hospital, then there is 2 possibilities here. Hospitals has no certified EHR at all. If they don't have certified EHR, they are outside of this program. So you're back into attesting only the stuff that you do at the office. However, if they have certified EHR, and they may not use that in the outpatient departments of your hospitals, and that's in general the case, excuse me. There were 8 hospitals that we have. I met with the counterpart CIOs and said, why you're not tracking the outpatient population that's coming to your outpatient departments? And said, well, it's just a minority of my patients. I don't have the time, energy, or inclination to do it, so I just don't do it. But it can be done with the same technology. Well, regardless if it's being tracked or not by the hospital EHR, as long as the hospital has one, you cannot exclude that population anymore. So it's a matter of defining what's the nature of the encounter. So if you cannot, I think there's a list. If you cannot dismiss this population, then they're going to contribute to your denominator. Problem here is that you are not tracking them, so they contribute 0 to the numerator. So having hospitals that you have to serve only is going to water down your ratio and may cause you to fall out of the incentives, and often it does, unless if you can intervene in the process. So the key here is the nature of the patient encounters, how you define patient encounter. And that has to do with the seen by provision that we talked today. So if the patient encounters a remote reading, like a PACS radiologist that's reading films remotely, CT, MR, tomographic data, that's one type of encounter. And if you do that, you can actually disregard that cohort that's coming from the hospital and only track the patients from your imaging centers. However, if you do physical consultation or if you have an intervention or a breast biopsy, that there's a possibility of the radiologist and the patient getting in touch, in contact in the same consultation room, you cannot dismiss that count. You have to aggregate those numbers into the denominator here. So in this case, you can say, if you're just doing remote reading, then you don't count the hospital outpatient population, but however, if you have an encounter, an intervention, or consultation, you have to counter those patients. However, the hospital is not tracking them, so they're going to contribute 0 to the numerator, and that's a bit of a problem. And for us, it's a bit easier because we control the schedule, so we can sort of mitigate that issue. But it is a biggest issue that we have encountered in stage 1. On the language of stage 2, there are new exemptions, hardship exemptions. I'm just going to come down to this one here. So the radiologists who lack both face-to-face interaction with patients and those who lack the need to follow up with patients can claim this hardship exemption. Well, the language goes even further and says, actually, specialties of anesthesiology, radiology, and pathology automatically granted this exception for a limit 5 years. So you don't need to even build on your policies and what's your rationale. It's actually granted at that point. So the idea here, go back. The idea here is that next year, if you're not attesting, you have at least to get this exemption. Otherwise, you're going to be penalized 2015. So if you haven't done anything, you do for the first time next year. At a minimum, this, right? The requirements are still the same: certified technology and quality people. There's just two requirements here, and none of it's trivial. But once you do it, I think it becomes easier and easier. In our case, who was responsible for capturing these new data points? We talk about 25 new data points that we have. And for us, it fell on the front desk and the techs to do it. There are very few things, actually, the radiologists are required to do. In our case, they are required to do some things that are related to PQRS, the Physician Quality Reporting System, that actually has a good correlation and an overlap with meaningful use now. And we have even more going forward. As we saw it here, and the previous speakers touched base on that, it's a standard-based solution. And yeah, I know. But this is actually, I look and I count, this is a 19-year-old slide. It used to be hell, but it's not anymore. So it's great. It's a great standard. I'm a big supporter of HL7. So this is our RIS. The oldest RIS that I know was decorated pen that was opened for business in 1979. And it's still somewhere in the museum. But so it's 33, 34-year-old technology. And it hasn't changed much. It has had multiple iterations, but it does scheduling up front. They do the patient tracking in the middle, issues accession numbers, medical record numbers, and has interface with PACS, with dictation, maybe with a coding system. So that's how it existed for many years. But more importantly here is an interfaced system. So interfacing data in and out of radiology workflow is second nature to us. So going forward, the RIS philosophically hasn't changed much, just the number of interfaces have increased. Which ones? Talk about e-prescribing. If there is a take-home message, folks, that we all have to do e-prescribing going forward. If you do less than 100 prescriptions, you don't need to do the e-prescribe itself, but that module, the e-prescribing module, does much more than that. It does medication reconciliation. It does drug-drug allergy interactions. There are a lot of features. And like we like to use DICOM and HL7, these people like to use their own language, and they also normalize the lexicon. So different systems can always order the same things. CT of the chest or chest CT, doesn't matter. It's normalized. They do also normalize. And like that, the other interfaces. Have an interface with labs. They use their own lexicon and also their own standard for transmission. We're going to have an interface. Perhaps you have to do some SQL queries to your own system to get some results out. You may have to develop interfaces with other systems. And you also use we talk about the HL7 info button here, which gets all the information that's available on the RIS and passes that information to other systems, so these other systems can come up with logic that may be helping patient care. And typically it's going to be used for the educational resources, but also for the CDS, the clinical decision support. That's going to be the biggest focus going forward. The RIS also use another HL7 standard, that the clinical document architecture, to transmit all this information that's being acquired, all this information gets encapsulated and sent through this standard here. And you're going to serve that to your web portal. In turn, the users, the receiver there, they'll be able to transmit and manage their own data. So that's the new RIS. It's the Meaningful Use Enhanced RIS, but fundamentally, it's not too different from where we started. And it does look like a lot of an EMR, but it's not one. Actually, EMRs per se cannot replace a RIS, because an EMR does not issue accession numbers. Accession numbers is the currency of radiology. They track patients by visit. So it's not a direct replacement. There's no threat in there. So the CDA, I'm not going to go into each of these standards, but they are our friends. They are important. The CDA establish everything that we're going to record, how we're going to record it, and then when you're going to distribute to patients or to other systems, this is it. That's what you're going to receive and send to the other information system. And they are all regimented by language and lexicons and standards. You're not going to have to reinvent the wheel here. So let's go quickly on the stage. CPOE, if you're doing e-prescription, you're going to do CPOE. It's just the order entry into a system. If you transmit that order, then it becomes e-prescription. But if you do e-prescription, you're already doing CPOE as well. That's going to be forward, and something that we have to do it. There are exceptions. There are some technical changes on the denominator, and going forward, that threshold goes up to 60% on stage 2, and also 30% of labs and 30% of RAD orders need to be registered in an information system. See, the private care physician, they need to enter the order for radiology, but if that person prints and faxes that order to radiology, that's perfectly valid. They are complying with this CPOE requirement. If you transmit the medication, then you're doing e-prescription, and that is, I recommend everybody to do it. We do it because we have a lot of interventional breast biopsy folks that order medication. But again, the module, and I just present here in our RIS, this module does a lot of things. It does e-prescription, it does medication reconciliation, it checks allergies, it checks against other drugs, all on the same module. And I'll bring some of that going forward too. But if you write less than 100 prescriptions a year, you are excluded, and the exclusions do apply going forward. In stage 1+, which I call it's effective 2013, there are a few exclusions that have been added. And that threshold goes up to 50% in stage 2. Drug-drug and drug-allergy interaction check, you have to do that. It's built in our case, built into the e-prescription module. It's just a click of a button. It's that simple. What goes behind the scenes is already built, so it's really a click of a button. So easy to do it. The next three, they have been dropped from the core, but they are required because if you read the language, it's part of the information that you give back to the patient, so you have to capture that. And as I said, is implemented under this e-prescribing module in our case, but I believe that it has some commonality with other applications. Maintain patient medication list. That too, it's one that radiology has to do it. You have to continue doing it. Currently for stage 1, you only need to enter one medication. Dosage is not necessary. But going forward, you have to enter the whole list of medication. Dosage is necessary. But for stage 2, this is probably going to come electronically. And this is the same things that we saw on the HL7 CDA. On the back end, that's where it gets expressed on the front end. Likewise, here is a click of a button, can be done. And again, it's based on that HL7 CDA standard. Don't need to reinvent the wheel here. Demographics, we all do that the threshold is just going to increase to 80%. Record and chart vital signs. Last year, when we were doing the same presentation here, there was a contentious issue because people think, well, this is really not radiology workflow. And you're absolutely right, it's really not radiology workflow. We do get blood pressure for all the CTAs that we do. There's no question about it. We get weight for any nuclear med exam that we do. But those are more exceptions. The bread and butter of radiology, plain film X-ray, you don't need neither of those measures. So we, as a policy developer, I think we believe we can be excluded because the majority of what we do really doesn't require that, either for the interpretation or for the acquisition to guide the tech. So actually, there's new language. There's some exclusions that have been added. They split, but it's more technicalities. And and it goes up to 80% on stage 2, but there's new language there that directly from the stage 2 said when a provider does not believe that height and weight and or blood pressure, because it has been split, are typically relevant to their scope of practice, but still record these vital signs only in exceptional circumstances, like we do for some exams, the provider is permitted to claim exclusion for this measure. And I went ahead and looked at, let's say that weight is relevant to shoot an X-ray, and indeed weight is relevant to shoot an X-ray. You need to know the mass that you are imaging to determine how much energy you're going to put on the machine. But how come when you look at the X-ray machines, and we had 51 of those, none of them allow you to enter the weight? Well, what's really relevant is the line path of the X-ray, and for the tech, what's relevant is the profile of the patient. It's a pear shape, it's an apple shape, it's big, it's small. So we are getting weight into the equation, but by proxy. The tech select the profile of the patient, and they should. So if you're going to get, if you believe you can get excluded from that, just build up your exclusion rationale, documented, file, you'll be fine. CDS used to perform one. This is a big deal going forward. It's going to be 5 CDS, and plus you have to enable and use the drug-drug and drug-allergy interaction checks and implement 5 CDS. On stage 1, we implemented, which most of us have. If you detect that your patient did not have a mammogram last year and she's more than 40 years of age, then you should have a decision that says, hey, this patient is due for mammogram. That is a clinical decision support interaction. Another one for radiology. If a CTA is ordered from the cardiology department, you know that the patient has allergy to iodine, and you know that some lab values are a bit high, and the patient has taken some medication. You can have logic that combines these things and then give some guidance to the radiologist. And be careful here because of potential adverse effects due to decreased renal function or allergy to contrast media. So there are CDS that apply internally to radiology and a bunch that apply externally. There's a talk today from Mr. Mardini about this. I recommend you attend. So patients with electronic copy and their health records, this is the patient portal. And this is our patient portal. I think it's a great thing, has been greatly accepted by the patients. Referring physicians like it too. They can order the exams from the portal. We have this interaction already with patients. These do consume resources. You have to, when you have an interaction with a patient, you have an interaction with a patient. They ask questions. You have to have a nurse to respond to those emails. Communication has to be secure, and so forth and so on. But this is a patient portal is a must. You have to have it. You're not going to do these things by paper, although you could. There are several of these measures that are combined, all under this patient portal sort of front end. And what are you distributing on the patient portal? All the information that you capture on the patient. So vital signs, if you capture those, medication, the allergy, everything that you capture, you put it there. If you didn't capture, you just put it not available. Okay? Provide clinical summaries for the patient's views. In stage 1 is a 50% threshold. The exclusion is too constrained to be claimed here. And there again, it's going to be to 1 day, and this information is already entered in the system. So when the patient goes in and they click on their website, sign in, you have to create that account in 1 day. It doesn't mean that all the results, the response of your IT team has to be in 1 day. And what's in there is the same information that is on the HL7 CDA. Again, that information used over and over again. If you don't have one of these elements, lab tests, put it not available. That's all. You have to protect all your internet-facing IP numbers. And that's, there's some confusion on this. Any internet-facing IP number of your EHR technology needs to be tested for penetration coming from the negative side of the firewall. So you try to come in and try to explore those ports. Doesn't need to be scientific. You get an outlet to do that. They give you a series of recommendations, vulnerabilities that you can patch, essentially getting patches from Microsoft, Cisco, whatever is your gear, and then you move on and you repeat next year as well. But this is we have been doing that for quite some time because of HIPAA, not because of meaningful use. We all been doing that, right? Yes. Good. Same for stage 2. The menu sets, right from the the get-go. Going forward, if you get excluded, it does not count. Right now, it does. If you get excluded from, you have to do 5 out of 10. If you get excluded from 1, that counts, even though you don't have to do it. Going forward, that's changed. The menu sets is a little bit more difficult, I think, for going for stage 2, but stage 1s they're quite doable. There are several that you can pick and choose from here. Again, going forward, those change, and also all the menu options here, most of them become core in stage 2. So if you don't do it today, you will have to do it. So to me, still the best preparation for stage 2 is to do stage 1, because there are 10 elements here that you may pick and choose now that later on you have to do it. Okay, drug formulary. Drug formulary is behind the e-prescribing. Again, another one that comes essentially free if you're doing a prescription. If you have a prescription, you're using a drug formulary. It can be an in-house drug formulary or an outsourced one. Doesn't matter. And that's also done on the e-prescribing. Clinical lab test results, if you order more than 100 lab test results per physician per year, you have to order them electronically. And the advantage of that is you get them electronically inside your RIS. Information that we in radiology have been struggling for years, getting the lab results faxed and so forth and so on. Just do an interface is standard. Lab has been doing interface for as long as radiology. And that threshold becomes a core, and the threshold is higher. Patient-specific education resource, that's the application of the info button. It looks at all the data elements, all the biosignals that you have in your RIS, encapsulates those, does not do any logic, sends that to an outlet that will do the logic and then give you some directions. So it's not that you have to do a lot of these things inside your RIS. You just need to interface the data elements out to someone that does that for a living. And some vendors do that way. Some vendors internalize that logic, which I think is more difficult to implement, certainly more timely. And is 10% going forward, becomes a core measure, and again, typical application of the info button. Medication reconciliation, you have to do that. For stage 1, it's a menu item. We prefer to skip because we don't feel that we have the tools to do it now. But stage 2, there are things that are coming that actually the language proposes how you do this medication reconciliation. In our case, it's already also inside the e-prescribing module. So there again, 6 of those measures are done by one module, typically with 1 click per measure. And on the concluding last 3 slides, CQMs, this year we had to do 3 core, 3 alternate core, and or 3 discretionaries from these different disease areas here. That's going to change substantially going forward. On stage 1, most people gravitated to those measures that can be captured as a yes or no or 1 and 0 answer. So 3 of those are here. It's just epidemiological questions. Did you take this vaccine last year? Have you been screened for this or that? Yes or no. You put in your system, you're done. Going forward, it's, there are more, but there are options. There are 64. Now it's going to require another meeting session to talk about those, or a couple of meeting sessions, because there are a lot of options. And instead of attestation, which is an honor code way of telling the government that you did what you're supposed to do, it's going to be by numeric reporting. This is the attestation page on the website. We attested last year, October of 2011, when we attest for year 1, and this is locked for payment. That's a good status to get. That's the money. The check's on the mail, electronically version of the check's on the mail. And that's it, and the check does come. And if you believe that on the incentive programs, I think you believe that no money is going to be disbursed without being audited later on. This is attestation is an honor code, honor system type of things. So you better believe that we will be audited. It will be, I think, irresponsible to develop this program without an audit purpose, without an audit feature. So you need to keep the electronic documentation or paper that supports attestation of all your measures. You need to have the documentation to support incentive payment calculation. You keep that for 60 years. And that's all.